Hello YouTube. Today I'm coming at you with a topic that to me is the most important one for longevity and the ability to grow big legs. And that is going to be the ability to use the lower back as a bridge. Now this is something that hinges on you having watched the videos I made about proper movement, because if you don't, it might feel a bit strange or off, because I'm going to go off of my own values, which are the idea that a proper technique when it comes to squat and deadlift is going to be objectively verifiable with your eyes and can be also seen through the stimulus and the experience the body goes through. And what I mean by that is, for example, if you're the type of person who deadlifts and then has lower back pain, to me that's a direct show that you're either doing a style of deadlift that you're not built for, or you're not deadlifting properly. I don't care how much you lift, I don't care how big you are, if you have lower back pain the day after deadlift or during deadlift, you're not deadlifting properly. Because a deadlift is moved with your legs, not with the lower back. The lower back serves as a bridge. Same logic with the squat. If you squat and you're limited by lower back pain, by lower back mobility, by the rounding of the lower back, it shows to me that you're doing something wrong, because the limiting factor in both of these lifts needs to be the legs. If your form is perfect and pristine on the back squat, when you fail, you should go right back down. Why? Because what fails is the ability of the legs to push. And you will find that this ability is really limitless when the structure stays put and is actually able to maintain rigidity. But that's for later in the video. And all of that is directly correlated with the idea and the sentence, use the lower back as a bridge. So I'm going to really go into details in this video about what I mean by that, because to me it's absolutely essential. And a lot of people, they want to say that, but instead they say lift with your legs. The issue with the lift with your legs shtick is that you lift with your legs regardless. When you do a squat or deadlift, it's not possible not to lift without the legs. But it is possible to underutilize the legs and overutilize the lower back. And this is why I like to create a distinction. And I prefer to talk about the body parts that are used in those movements in terms of properties and not necessarily in terms of movement or power production. Because you will see that a lot of people, their issue with the squat and the deadlift is that they utilize both the lower back and the legs for power production through flexion. And this is something you need to avoid at all costs, because the flexion part is going to happen with the legs. The lower back is going to remain rigid, and this is the point where I talk about bridge. What is a bridge? Does the bridge bend? Is the bridge going to be folded in half? No, the bridge connects two things. And there might be power going through the bridge, but the bridge in itself doesn't transmit the power. It's just a connection. And I picture the lower back as a bridge because if you look at the lifts that I'm going to discuss in this video, be it the squat or the deadlift and all of their variations, so pretty much any knee flexion or hip hinge, look at what the lower back really does. It is going to connect the area of the body that is going to maintain the bar in place, which is the upper body, with the part of the body that is going to promote the motion of the bar, which is the lower body. When you do a squat, the shelf where the bar rests is the upper back. And what moves that bar is going to be the legs pushing. Same for the deadlift. You grab onto the bar and then you grind with the leg in a hip hinge position. And what is in between those two things, those two factions? The lower back. It creates a bridge. It's that connection. And by that definition and because of that, a lot of people experience damages in their lower back because since that body part is put under so much stress to create that communication between the two areas, it sometimes suffers, and very often it suffers. And the goal of the bodybuilder should be to make sure that we manage to completely remove that aspect and we make it as bulletproof as possible. And that goes through training it, of course, but it mostly is going to be a technique aspect because you will find that regardless of how much you train the lower back, it is always going to be a limiting factor. And for the most part, people who fail a squat or deadlift because they don't use the bodybuilding form that I prescribe, what is going to stop them from continuing the lift is excessive lumbar rounding or excessive thoracic spine rounding, which is a direct it's a direct byproduct of the failure of the lower back to actually maintain rigidity and stay bridged, to maintain that aspect of the bridge. So with that in mind, it does mean that if we want the lower back to be acting as a bridge, we need to treat it as a bridge. And that is going to mean that as you train the lower back, you need to keep in mind that if you want it to remain rigid, you need to train it to be rigid. And what does that mean? That means that for the most part, the way the growth of the lower back is going to occur is through isometric stretch, meaning that you're very scarcely going to focus and emphasize the flexion on the lower back. I'm not saying never do it, of course, I'm not an extremist, but I would say that unless it has a direct application for your purpose and your functional training, quote unquote, you shouldn't have to do that because it will grow regardless. There are certain areas of the body, like the front dart to an extent, the glutes, that will get worked regardless. So you don't have to focus on having them work. And the lower back is one of them. That being said, I'm not saying to be minimalistic and just do squat and deadlift. You can do back upper extension, reverse hypers. Those are all great. But you also see that with those movements, if they're done properly, the lower back remains rigid. It keeps the ability to stay bridged. And that's the reason why if you do hyperextensions, for example, I highly encourage you to not do them by rounding your lower back. You're supposed to do a hip hinge. And across the board, that is going to be how you're supposed to do things. A proper deadlift is a hip hinge. It's not a lumbar flexion. Same for the squat. And I think that pretty much everyone agrees with that. But where people stop agreeing is when that flexion occurs under load. Because some people will tell you that it's going to happen regardless. And therefore, they have a fatalistic and fatalist mindset regarding that technical flow, and they try to misconstrue that as not being a flow. And they're going to tell you that it's a normal occurrence. It's not. It is if you encourage the lower back to give under load. But you can apply technique and form that is going to make it so that when you fail, the lower back remained rigid through failure. And the reason why I said that you will see that this practice is going to be correlated with a higher ability to actually push is that as long as the lower back remains neutral and the spine remains neutral, you find that the ability to grind is greatly improved because you can really push through situations that looked impossible to budge. A lot of people who fell on lower body lifts fell because their form breaks down and it puts them in a position where they cannot input power anymore. But as long as the structure remains stable, the power can be outputted. Most of the time you will be outdone or you're going to fail because you won't be able to keep providing the effort, but it has nothing to do with you not being in position for that. It's just that the muscular endurance ran out. And guess what? That's what we want. You want to be limited by muscular endurance as a bodybuilder. So you'll see that this is something that is essential. And in terms of injury prevention, I think this is something that is going to be very relevant for a lot of people. Because the number one reason why people cannot squat and deadlift frequently for years is because of lower back pain. At some point, they're limited by that. This is why I say that it's a limiting factor. And of course, it would be, because if you look at the musculature and the structure of the lower back, it's not a gigantic muscle. And the position of the bridge in the structure also makes it so that it's put under a lot of stress because of the actual loading. By default, even if you keep it stable and neutral, it's still put under that stress. Why? Think back about the two areas I told you the bridge connects. Look at where they're placed. The lower back is pretty much equidistant between the two. Meaning that if you look at it and you look at the weight disposition and the weight distribution of it, smack down in the middle is the lower back. So it's going to handle a lot of that stress. And as we know, stress can be good because it promotes muscular fiber damage. But when it's going to concern something that is much more structural in nature, like your spine, it's something we need to be very careful of. And so this is also why I've never really heard people say that. But keep in mind that people who tell you that it's fine to let the lower back take over are really telling you that it's fine to have the lower back be the dominant mover of a movement. And that's just not true. It is just the opposite of true. Because it also is going to make it so that your legs don't actually get the tonnage that they should. And so that is my firm stance on that. The lower back is a bridge, period. You don't want flexion. Any amount of flexion is considered form breakdown, and in my book, it's wrong, for bodybuilders at least. And I speak from experience because I have started, and I think it was around 2 years ago, but I've started to really take my lower body lifts seriously and apply them in that manner. And have now been able to really up the frequency and the volume a lot to a point where most people who tell me that it's too much and not doable, and yet I do it. I deadlift heavy twice a week, I squat heavy twice a week, I rotate the movements all the time, but there is always 3 heavy lower body movements in my training sessions during the week, always. I don't take deloads, I don't take days off, and I keep progressing. Why? Because the limiting factor is the lower back. And for my case, since the lower back remains neutral at all times and it stays bridged, it doesn't suffer from overuse injuries. Because what limits me in those cases is going to be the ability of the legs to stay endurant and to recover for the next session. So what I'm going to tell you to do, if you're the type of person that also has felt that lower back pain, that lower back limitation, and who wants to build big legs and also a big upper back, because you quickly find that the lower back also is going to be a limiting factor for the upper back growth for the most part. What I want you to do is, I want to apply that mindset to your training. I want you to try and find a form, a technique, a stance, whatever, where the lower back will remain stable and neutral and rigid. Meaning that from the start of the movement to the end of the movement, what changed in the lower back is its angle. It's not its flexion. You can start here and end here. That's perfectly fine. You have to, if you want to lock a deadlift, for example. But what you don't want is this to happen. This is a flexion. You don't want that to happen. You want the back to be in its exact same angle in absolute terms from start to finish. And for the squat, it's the same logic. What is going to dictate the torso angle shift is going to be the amount of hip hinge. It can never be the flexion of the spine by itself. Never. Because this is how you get to snap city. And if you want to avoid that, again, you keep that in mind. We want to lift with our legs. And how do we lift with the legs? We create a bridge in between the two areas that is going to remain stable. And the reason why I also wanted to sort of do away with the idea of presenting that technique as just lift with your legs, bro, is that a lot of people, when they hear lift with your legs, they're going to focus intently on pushing with their legs. And when they push very strongly, they either push when they start the deadlift or they push when they reverse the negative into a positive on the squat. And what that does is they stop paying attention and they completely lose control over their form. And what tends to happen is they push with their legs, but what they're really doing is they're pushing their hips up. How many times have you seen that? You see a guy about to deadlift and it looks like he's about to sprint. And the second he starts pulling, the hips shoot up. Why? He tried to push with his legs. But what he did really is he pushed with the legs up until the point where the lower back finally found a position where it was comfortable to hinge against the bar, which doesn't constitute a safe position. It just means that the body lazily got into the easiest position for its current mobility and ability to move weight. And then disaster occurs. You just lift with the lower back only. Same for the squat. People who reverse too quickly, their hips shoot back and then they good morning the weight. It's the reason why I want to completely get rid of that semantics, because a lot of the time when you tell someone lift with your legs, they do the exact opposite of that, meaning that the legs end up being the bridge. That's the crazy sarcastic twist of that entire thing. If you completely lock the legs, quick on the deadlift, but the lower back and the shoulders are still slumped, now the legs cannot provide energy anymore. What provides energy is you hinging against the bar with your spine curved. So now your legs are a bridge, they are a structure of stability because they're fully locked, and what is creating the power is the lower back. This is backwards. Look at the musculature of the legs. You have insane horsepower in that area. You want that to be the thing that's providing the power. A good deadlift locks when the knees lock. The hips, the knees, and the shoulders lock at the same time. That's a proper deadlift. Same logic for the squat. And therefore, for that to be able to happen, you need the lower back to remain neutral. And you can do that through form checks, you can do that through checking yourself in the mirror, but for the most part, it's just going to feel right. And if you've been deadlifting with pole form for a while, you will know immediately because the feeling you will get in your hamstrings and your core will be like night and day. It'll feel like you finally did the exercise correctly for once. So that is my practice. That is the practice I encourage you to do if you want to stay in the game for a long time, because understand also that when you focus on pushing and actually developing power with the legs, what it does is it damages muscle fiber because the legs are made of muscle fiber. But if you keep hinging and using the lower back, guess what? That's mostly structure, and that is going to deteriorate to the point where you can't use it anymore. So on one hand, you have the school of thought where you damage muscle and it grows bigger and stronger. On the other, you have the one where you damage bone structure and it doesn't grow bigger or stronger, it just deteriorates to the point where it's not usable anymore and you end up limited in your mobility. So you want to avoid that at all cost. And that is going to be it for this video. If you have any questions about the utilization of the lower back as a bridge, let me know in the comments, but I think that I was pretty precise and accurate with my description. If you want examples of what it means, check the Road to Bigger Legs and Road to Bigger Back playlist. Look at the way I deadlift, look at the way I squat. I'm not telling you here to do exactly the way I do it because you won't be able to. You don't have my segments, you don't have my proportions. But there exists a technique and lifting variation out there that is going to allow you to lift with a neutral back 100%. There exists no person without a very big anomaly of the spine that cannot lift with a straight back and a bridged back. You just have to find it. And I can tell you this right now. Yes, you might have to sacrifice strength and progression for a while to be able to find that thing. And yes, you might not be able to lift as much weight, but it's going to be worth it in the end and in the long run. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.